Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Item 6 is a public hearing on a resolution regarding spending affordability guidelines for the FY23 capital budget and the FY23 to 28 capital improvements program. These guidelines are to be based on how much additional debt the county can afford given certain financial and economic factors specified in Chapter 20 of the County Code. The guidelines specify the maximum level of debt that should be approved. The guidelines for the aggregate capital budget may not be exceeded unless approved by 7 council members. After considering the public hearing testimony and other relevant matters, the council may adopt guidelines that differ from the proposed guidelines. A GO committee work session is tentatively scheduled for September 30th, and persons wishing to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business on September 24th. Ms. Salu, can you call on the first speaker?
Yes, good afternoon. Our first speaker for this public hearing is Ms. Mary Beck. Ms. Beck, you have 2 minutes for your testimony and you may begin when you are ready.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Beck from the Office of Management and Budget, and I'm here to testify on behalf of the County Executive, Mark Elrich, regarding his FY23 to 28 spending affordability guideline recommendations. The Executive recommends that the Council adopt the following guidelines: $300 million in FY23 and $290 million each year for the remaining FY24 to 28 period, for a 6-year total of $1.75 billion. These guidelines would maintain the approved guidelines for FY23 and 24 and stabilize the remaining years at a slightly higher amount than previously approved. This the Executive believes balances the operating and capital budget needs. Given our current budget structure and outlook, the Executive does not recommend going beyond these debt levels at this time, and that is because of his desire to maintain greater operating budget flexibility and to avoid crowding out other vital operating budget expenses. The county already faces a lot of inflexibility in its budget. In FY22, 64% of the budget was dedicated to schools, college, and tax-supported debt service. And we need funding to operate the facilities, the new facilities we build in the CIP. We know that the debt service budget is the second largest, only behind the schools, and it has grown exponentially compared to other budgets. In FY11, tax-supported debt service was $256 million. Even under these constrained debt recommendations, it will rise to $507 million by FY28. Fortunately, council members and their staff are working with the executive branch to explore alternative infrastructure funding options for schools and transportation, and the county executive is grateful for that work and welcomes your input on this topic. For park and planning bonds, the executive recommends $6.6 million in FY23 and $6.7 million annually for the remaining years, for a total of $40.1 million in the 6-year period. We thank you for your consideration and will be available to answer any questions you have in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Ms. Shruti Bhatnagar. Ms. Bhatnagar, you may begin your testimony when you are ready, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, County Council President Tucker and council members. My name is Shruti Bhatnagar, and I am the chair of the Sierra Club Montgomery County Group. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I will be highlighting some of the transportation projects in today's testimony. Sierra Club Montgomery County Group is indeed on board with the county's goals of fighting climate change, building rapid transit, and advancing racial equity and social justice. The Sierra Club believes that the 2 projects that are especially in need of construction funding should be prioritized and support the above goals are the Weir's Mill BRT project and the CCT tunnel under Wisconsin Avenue. The Weir's Mill Road project will reward current transit users in a 50% minority corridor, support students, and provide faster connection to jobs. And the CCT tunnel under Wisconsin Avenue will bring trail users to the Purple Line station in Bethesda, provide a safe cycling and pedestrian path below 6-lane Wisconsin Avenue, and offer safe access to those commuting to and from the Purple Line station and jobs or schools across Wisconsin Avenue. The other projects that we would highlight in the CIP include electrify the ride-on fleet, funding to implement dedicated bus lanes for BRT Route 25, Priority BRT routes, designing and preliminary engineering funding for these, and Forest Glen Metro entrance to ensure safe access for pedestrians. The Great Seneca Science Corridor bus plan, BIPA to improve safe bike and pedestrian access, and red paint for dedicated bus lanes. In a 2015 Harvard study of upward mobility, transportation emerged as crucial to escaping poverty. Therefore, as you deliberate on the CIP priorities, we urge that you allocate appropriate funding for these projects that will connect more people to more jobs and greatly enhance equity and economic benefits. Thank you for taking into consideration these projects that Sierra Club finds very important.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Ms. Jane Lyons. Ms. Lyons, you have 2 minutes and you may begin your testimony when you are ready.
Thank you, President Hucker and council members. My name is Jane Lyons, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Coalition for Smarter Growth, a leading organization advocating for walkable, inclusive, transit-oriented communities as the most sustainable, equitable way for the DC region to grow. We urge you to support a capital budget and capital improvements program that prioritizes investments in transit, bicycle, and pedestrian improvements, as well as affordable housing. Now more than ever, we need to think boldly about our infrastructure. Our infrastructure impacts our ability to mitigate and adapt to climate change and is at the root of economic development and community investment. Specifically, transportation infrastructure has the ability to provide residents with access to jobs, education, retail, and other amenities, making it a key component of quality of life and well-being. Thus, in the FY 23-28 CIP, we urge you to create the capacity to properly prioritize sustainable transportation. This includes not only the continued design and preliminary engineering of future bus rapid transit routes, but also construction funding for certain high priority and high impact routes, such as the Veers Mill corridor. The programming of construction dollars also has the ability to attract federal matching investments. We also urge you to fund projects that improve access to the county's metro stations, one of our most valuable resources, and projects that make it easier to walk and bicycle throughout Montgomery County. Montgomery County has such an exciting future planned, but those plans for more welcoming, complete communities hinge on the county having a robust, safe, multimodal transit network. Achieving those goals requires dedicated public investment. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Mr. Robert Nelson. Mr. Nelson, you have 2 minutes for your testimony and you may begin when you are ready.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert Nelson, resident of Goshen and former chair of the Up County Citizens Advisory Board. The County Council needs to consider raising the spending affordability guidelines and the CIP funding to make Montgomery County more attractive for business investment. Several affordability indicators used in the calculations are up significantly. Taxable real property values are up 9% in Maryland for each of the past 2 years. It's up 16% in Montgomery County for commercial properties. The availability of state funds will be increasing as well as an influx of funding from your colleagues in Washington. According to the White House, the bipartisan infrastructure deal will invest $110 billion of new funds for roads, bridges, and major projects. And this deal will grow the economy, enhance our competitiveness, create good jobs, and make our economy more sustainable, resilient, and just. So my question to you is, why are the proposed spending affordability guidelines declining from FY 23 to 24 and remaining flat for the next 6 years? The backlog of projects in the fastest growing region of the county, Yup County, is enormous. We need employment centers, schools, fire station, police station, reconstruction of crumbling roads, and replacement of failing bridges. We need an extension of Metro Rail north of Gaithersburg with the quality of the Purple Line. We need transportation infrastructure, promised for decades, including the completion of the Eastern Arterial, M83. Thrive 2050 does not address the challenges facing the Up County. It would be disastrous for Montgomery County to implement. Urbanizing the Up County would just exacerbate existing problems, make it more difficult for Up County residents to reach their jobs. The Up County already has the most affordable housing, so that residents of all socioeconomic levels can feel at home. It isn't equity to continue to allow Up County's pressing needs to go unfulfilled. It's 280 days until next year's primary election. I'm sure that Up County voters want to see a change from being viewed as the county's stepchild to a full participant with 1/3 of the county's population. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Ms. Laura Stewart. Ms. Stewart, you have 2 minutes for your testimony and you may begin when you are ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Stewart. I am representing MCCPTA as the CIP chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the spending affordability guidelines. First, I want to congratulate the council for working to keep our AAA bond rating intact, which is in part due to your bond debt policy. I do want to caution this council that reduction in debt needs to be coupled with a dependable revenue stream for construction projects. We have not seen a willingness to address the revenue side over the last few years, forcing the CIP to a level of spending not seen since 2015. At the same time, our building costs have gone up by 20%. Therefore, we've advocated for a slower approach to reducing debt, which we continue to do today. The last CIP was built assuming that Maryland's contribution to our school construction budget would grow up to $40 million in FY24. The Built to Learn Act is based on matching funds, so we need MCPS to find ways to maximize the match. And we need to encourage our legislators to make changes so that the blueprint objectives are considered, and we need to increase the local contribution. All three need to happen in order to keep our current projects on schedule and to add badly needed projects. In the last SSP update, now called the growth policy, the council cut impact taxes, which reduced our revenue for school construction. In the last couple of years, other districts went the other way. They increased their revenue, including Baltimore, Anne Arundel, and Howard County. In fact, Howard County increased their transfer tax in 2020. It's time we look at the progressive recordation tax or another tax so that our kids have adequate spaces to learn in a time that healthy facilities are especially imperative during a respiratory pandemic. And remember, parents vote too. We'll remember if you took care of our schools. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Council President. That wraps up all the speakers for this afternoon.
Terrific. Thank you all very much. This public hearing is now closed. For item 7, we'll receive a briefing on the climate action plan. Mr. Levchenko, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, just to note, just a quick framing of this. We have a number of staff from the executive branch led by Adriana Hochberg, but we also have some consultants from the team that helped with the development of the climate action plan. I think that's something that Council President had requested that we have them present as well. And we also have, as I mentioned, a number of staff from across several departments. I have some background in the Council staff report. I'm not going to go over it again now, but if folks have any questions about that, we can also bring that up, or you can look at the packet for that. But I'd like to just turn it over to Adriana now in the interest of time and just get right into the presentation, and then we can maybe have discussion and questions after that.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Hochberg and Mr. Ortiz, and Ms. Shaw, and Mr. Harris.
Good afternoon. This week is Climate Week. World leaders are gathering at the United Nations later this week for high-level meetings on climate and energy issues. The IPCC report that came out in August has sounded the alarm. This is code red for humanity. Speaking at a Climate Week NYC event earlier today, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry said that the consequences of these decades' choices could not be greater. Alok Sharma, who is the president-designate of the upcoming UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, said that this is going to be the decisive decade for climate action. And he added that the window for keeping the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive is closing. Bill Gates is also sounding the alarm. He said earlier today that addressing climate change will be the hardest thing that humanity has ever done. Local governments have an important role to play in climate action. The leadership of Montgomery County has heard the call. The County Council established the goals to eliminate our greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 and get to 80% reductions by 2027. and the county executive recently released a climate action plan to help us get there. Our presentation this afternoon will provide an overview of the climate action plan and the key actions that are already underway. I'm joined this afternoon by members of the climate team and the technical consultants from AECOM. Before we delve into the presentation, I'd like to turn it over to Director Adam Ortiz of the Department of Environmental Protection for his introductory remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Hodgberg. Good to see everybody again. And I'll be brief because there's a lot of stuff to cover here. We're all familiar with the challenge before us. We're all familiar, and we've had lots of conversations about various aspects, and we have pieces of legislation before you. But what this signifies is that how serious we are about being bigger, better, and faster in our response to climate change. Montgomery County must lead. We have to show other counties what is possible, and that involves taking some risks. So in this report, we have lots to build on. We have some validation of work that we're already doing. Many of you know that before this administration took place, there was massive investments in solar, benchmarking took place, planning for BEPS was taking place, even before, and that reinforced that work. But it also supports new work that's before the council and gives us a lot to draw on for the tough decisions that we have to make ahead. I want to just note two things and then pass it back to Adriana. The first is that the level of engagement is tremendous here, and the administration received some criticism. Why are you taking so long to do this? It's because we needed hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders involved, because some of the decisions ahead are going to be tough. And we have to have the business community on board to the extent that we can. We have to have the public to the extent that we can, and every other stakeholder. And I think it was successful, as we're going to see it as we talk about some of the legislation ahead. Also, internally, the departments, I've never seen departments work more closely together in my years of public service. Across many departments, we're working on legislation, policies, programs, staffing on a number of proposals, and it's pretty seamless. So we're upping our game. We have a lot to do, and we're going to touch on some of that. And we certainly can't do it alone. So we welcome the chance today to talk to all of you, because we need your help and partnership as we've needed in the past and will need in the future. But I look forward to the discussion, and thank you, Adriana.
Thank you, Director Ortiz. So the Climate Action Plan is a long and comprehensive document, but if I were to give a stab at summarizing 300 pages into one slide, here it is. The Climate Action Plan lays out a path for the county to meet our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal by 2035. It includes a number of actions related to reducing and eventually eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from the energy, buildings, and transportation sectors. It also focuses on the need to center racial equity and climate justice in climate solutions, because we know that even though climate change impacts all, it doesn't impact all equally, and it's the most vulnerable members of our community who have been the most impacted by COVID, also the most impacted by climate change, and we must center our efforts on these members of our community. We must also address residual emissions and carbon sequestration. By residual emissions, I'm referring to the smaller sources of greenhouse gas emissions in our greenhouse gas inventory. That includes things like emissions from the wastewater treatment sector, from solid waste management, refrigerant emissions, as well as the fugitive emissions, methane emissions from natural gas pipelines. And carbon sequestration involves strategies, nature-based solutions for capturing the carbon out of the atmosphere into the soils and wetlands. The Climate Action Plan also includes a number of actions related to reducing risks from climate hazards, because climate change is already here. It's already upon us and facing us. There is going to be a need to identify more resources to pay for climate action. Already, the county government, through our operating budget and CIP budget, we fund a number of climate initiatives, but county government resources alone are not enough. We need to leverage state and federal resources as well as private sector resources as well. We must enhance climate governance in Montgomery County, and we're already well underway with creating that organizational backbone and infrastructure to make sure that we are centering every decision, every procurement, every budgeting decision with a climate lens in mind. And we recognize the need to engage our community as partners in climate action. County government, we don't have all the solutions, all the answers alone. We're all in this together. It's going to really take all of us to reach our goals. And then, we need to take the next steps. The climate action plan in of itself, it's not self-implementing. There's a lot of hard work that follows it, including even if we are able to meet our ambitious goals by 2027 and 2035, the work is not done, not even then. For example, that is because consumption emissions are not currently included in our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, but they are significant. So that is another piece of this challenge that we're going to have to tackle. When we released the climate action plan in June, we actually released 2 reports at the same time. The first was the climate action plan itself, and the second one was our fiscal year 22 climate work plan. So the climate action plan, it's our strategic plan to achieve our goals by 2035. It includes 86 actions across 7 sectors. It identifies actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It identifies the localized climate hazards, as well as those actions to increase resilience and adapt to changing climate. And it also identifies equity enhancing measures. The fiscal year 22 climate work plan is our annual implementation plan, and we intend to issue an annual plan at the beginning of each fiscal year moving forward. It enables flexibility in implementing the climate action plan. It identifies legislative and regulatory actions for the coming year, and it also aligns our staff and funding resources. And for this first year of plan implementation, 75 out of the 86 climate actions are moving forward in some shape or form. Some are smaller steps and some are bigger steps. Both of these reports are available on our climate website, and the URL for it is listed here at the bottom of this page. One of the things that our technical consultants did as part of the climate action plan was they downscaled global climate change models for the boundaries or borders of Montgomery County to give us a sense of what we can expect here in Montgomery County for 3 out years, 2035, 2050, and 2100. And the key takeaways from that analysis is that the risk of moderate, severe, and extreme drought is going to go up. And the number of high heat days is also going to go up. By the year 2100, as you can see on this visual of a calendar on the right, we can expect 2 full months a year of temperatures exceeding 95 degrees. And that's not even factoring in the impact of humidity. Even by 2035, we can expect 12 days a year of temperatures exceeding 95 degrees. And we know what that's like. We had several of those days this summer, and it's not comfortable and it's not healthy. We can also expect more extreme precipitation events. I think what we experienced this summer is just a prelude of what's to come, as well as greater precipitation totals. As well as more high wind events. And already when we compare the first decade of the century with the second decade, we've already experienced an increase in property damage across the county as a result of damage from high winds. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Doug, who will talk about how we have centered racial equity and social justice in our plan.
There are a number of maps in the CAP that highlight existing inequities, and the recommendations seek to address these vulnerabilities. And on the left, ACOM, our consultant, spatially maps CDC's social vulnerability index to highlight areas in the county where we'd anticipate residents are more susceptible to the detrimental impacts of climate change. The map on the right shows the energy burden in the county. Red shaded areas indicate census tracts where the average energy costs are 3% or greater of a household's income. Of course, this is a real concern. If we're having increased number of high heat days and folks have a high energy burden, there's going to be that wrenching choice between running the air conditioner or dealing with the intense heat to save money. Also, the last thing we want to do in the CAP is to exacerbate existing racial and social inequities. So, for example, as it relates to the Community Choice Energy Program, where the county would procure clean energy on the part of our residents and businesses, we've identified equity enhancing measures, as we've done with many of the actions. And if you look at the shaded box there, we suggest prospective measures at a very high level, but things like balance the cost and percentage of renewables in the electricity mix. If there's a premium with clean electricity, county needs to consider ways to offset that premium. Another one is develop and promote an awareness campaign on how to access the CCE program and its benefits, and campaigns should be in multiple languages. Next.
This slide is a highlight or summary of the 25 greenhouse gas reduction actions that are included in the climate action plan. On the left, the graph shows the depiction of our 2018 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And fully 50% of our emissions are coming from the residential and commercial sector, residential and commercial building sector, and another 42% coming from transportation. So that means that significant shifts will be needed in the way that we generate and use energy in terms of how we heat and cool our homes, our businesses and public buildings, how we fuel our vehicles, as well as our consumption patterns. And listed here is a subset of those 25 greenhouse gas reduction actions that are centered in buildings, transportation, and clean energy. They include the community choice energy that Doug just spoke about, expanding solar installations in both private and public sites, building energy performance standards for existing buildings, net zero building codes for new buildings, identifying policy approaches for building electrification and disincentivizing the use of natural gas, incentives for vehicle electrification and disincentives for the continued use of internal combustion engine vehicles, as well as expanding public transit, active transportation, and shared micromobility. And of course, zero emissions buses and fleet procurements. In terms of carbon sequestration actions, the focus is on nature-based actions relating to retaining and increasing forests and tree canopy, as well as regenerative agriculture and increasing carbon in soils through improved agricultural practices. The plan also includes 20 climate adaptation actions. They include water infrastructure resilience and water supply protection, resiliency hubs, updating green streetscape and green infrastructure standards, on-site water reuse, and updating of floodplain maps.
In terms of governance, one of the guiding principles in the CAP is to use all levers of government. There are a multitude of strategic sort of pressure points at our disposal that can have a multiplier effect, from our budgeting and procurement processes to our staff training and job descriptions that could all spark cascading changes. And we've been working with OMB to conduct training for their analysts about climate change and how we're conveying a new normal that's upon us that requires a different way of assessing risk as it relates to vulnerable community members and our infrastructure and assets, sensitivity to climate change, adaptive capacity, etc. OMB is also requiring departments to answer a set of climate-related questions, both on the mitigation and the resiliency front. And we're doing this in a stepwise fashion with the intention to deepen and refine efforts as we go along. OMB also requires departments to identify at least one climate ambassador, to mobilize staff to green their department's day-to-day operations, build resiliency among vulnerable community members they serve, and work as a team with other department ambassadors. Another key lever identified in the CAP is procurement. We need expertise in establishing sort of an environmentally preferable purchasing policy, creating green specifications for RFPs, and importantly, partnering with local anchor institutions to come together to collectively drive change in the local market. In terms of public engagement, I'll just mention 33 top line recommendations. One is to establish what we're currently calling a Community Justice Academy. This is conceptual. It might change as we engage community members, but an academy which graduating community ambassadors representing their neighbors conceive and co-create integrated health, equity, and quality of life solutions directly applicable to their communities. The central thrust of this action is about power sharing and cultivating community-driven civic leadership and the co-creation of community-based solutions. Another one is creating a climate change communication coalition with representatives from each department and hopefully key civic and business associations and networks, develop a coordinated communication and outreach strategy and action plan, really flooding sort of the market with key messages to drive change. A third one is to establish a statewide coalition focused on advancing ambitious state climate policy. We've already had a few meetings with several jurisdictions, like 10 different jurisdictions or more. And we recently established a steering committee. We're starting to think through our mission, process, et cetera. Colorado, Virginia has done this, and there's real enthusiasm among the largest counties in the state to move forward on this. We're really excited by the prospect. Finally, there's a section in the CAP it's entitled "What Can I Do?" It's several pages of actions with links to carbon calculators, websites, and a set of actions from energy audits, gift giving, meatless Mondays, buying flood insurance, checking on vulnerable neighborhoods during high heat days and flooding events, et cetera. We got these ambitious goals and this very sweeping plan, of course, and people are now asking, well, what can I do? So we need to distill these series of recommended actions into something probably a bit simpler, tie it to the work of the Climate Change Communication Coalition, and create a program that enables us to seize community interest in getting involved.
Something here. As I mentioned earlier, we weren't waiting for a plan to be done. We had to get things moving, and there's a lot of things underway. Montgomery's been a leader, but we have much more to do. And Mr. President / T&E Chair, I'm speaking with you and Councilman Reamer and Councilman Glass. We've had briefings on many of these issues. You've given us great feedback, and recently we've spoken with Councilman Albornoz and Jawando about some of it. So we've had great feedback, great discussion. We really appreciate your co-leadership and support on these issues. So BEPS, we've had a lot of discussion about, but that is the principal piece of legislation that the administration has on climate before the council now. We think we've done it in a way that was thoughtful and engaged. We've worked very closely with the chambers. We worked very closely with AOBA and other stakeholders. We've incorporated their concerns to make sure that we push progress, but we don't shove progress if it can't be done in a certain time frame, but that we get to the goal. And as we've said before, a trajectory approach. So again, great conversations with all of you that we've spoken to in brief, and we really appreciate your support. The Green Construction Code was sent over by the administration almost 6 months ago. So we look forward to more hearings or work sessions on that update, critical update. BEPS deals with the existing inventory, but the Green Construction Code is with the inventory yet to come. So we have to make sure that, we're doing things, looking forward. And there's plenty of examples of commercial buildings and residential buildings that are already exceeding these standards. So we know that it can be done. Transportation demand management, working closely with DOT. Many of you are familiar with progress made on that. And currently we're in a comment period. Community choice energy is a really big deal. And some of us testified in Annapolis in recent years to support Delegate Charkoudian, one of the brightest stars in Annapolis from Montgomery County. And she was pushing this rock pill to try to get it for all the state of Maryland. But Montgomery County, with all of your support, when she couldn't get that across the line, we said we would just like the enabling authority to do it so we can show proof of concept that we can purchase clean energy and clean our energy supply. And I think everybody's familiar with the concept. It allows us to buy clean energy much higher than the standard service, and with giving residents the opportunity to opt out. But that's a big deal. We can have efficient buildings, but if they're still powered by dirty energy, that doesn't get us to where we need to be. So we need to get the usage down and then the supply up that's clean, and that's going to really be transformative since 50% of energy usage is coming from our built inventory. And then finally, there's a lot of other stuff in the works about a resilience authority at the Green Bank, about CPACE, about banning gas powered leaf blowers, and also two things off script, Mr. President. So some spoilers here, ladies and gentlemen, but it turns out that the county does not have a county tree. We have a county flower, we have a county bird. I even think we have a county insect, but we don't have a county tree. So working with our stakeholder groups and arborists and forest conservation experts, we're going to be sending to council very shortly naming a county tree that is climate resilient, that we're going to encourage residents to plant because it's large canopy and long lived. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, in the upcoming budget, and this is the first time it's been announced, is that the administration is working on a dedicated climate action enterprise fund, with some of the funding coming from the fuel tax. As we know, the fuel tax is an incentive for cleaner energy usage by utilities, but it's not always dedicated to this work. And we know that this work is massive and it deserves a dedicated enterprise fund, just like our solid waste programs do, just like our watershed programs do. So stay tuned. We'll have more conversations about that as we develop our budget that we send to you. Back to you, Adriana.
Thank you.
So the fiscal year 22 climate work plan includes the full list of the 75 things we're working on. So this is just a sample of what they are. We have a lot of balls in the air, a lot of good work happening, and dozens of colleagues across county departments and agencies working collaboratively on these efforts. And happy to go into depth on any of these if you have questions. The last slide for you, our key takeaways is that significant effort, including budget and staff, is necessary to meet the county's climate goals. We must leverage both public and private resources, and also must center racial equity and social justice considerations in climate solutions to ensure equitable outcomes. Different and new governance and community engagement approaches are necessary in order to be more inclusive of all voices in our diverse community. And climate action is already underway, including a number of legislation and regulations that are currently before council. So that concludes our presentation, and we welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hochberg, to you and your team. I know we haven't had enough time to talk about anything but COVID and the recession this year, but I wanted to schedule this because it's so important that the council focus on the existential threat of the climate crisis as well. All of us, I think, on the council are really excited about the need for this plan. Of course, as a reminder, we insisted on it. The council restored the funding for the climate action plan that was eliminated previously. And now that it's finalized, we really wanted the opportunity to talk to you all in full council, not just in the T&E committee, and the consultants that prepared it. So I'm really grateful that after a lot of delays, we've gotten to this day. Welcome, Ms. Brecher. Do you want to introduce the other folks on your team, including the folks from AECOM? Because this is, I think, the first time many of the council members have met them.
Absolutely. So let's see, just in order that I see folks here on the screen. Lindsay Shaw from the Department of Environmental Protection, St. Edwards from the Department of Environmental Protection as well. Vanessa Go is one of the consultants from the AECOM team. Tina Laboy from the Office of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. Doug Weisberger from the Department of Environmental Protection. Emily Dingra, one of the consultants from the AECOM team. Ida Namur, also from the AECOM team. Patty Bubar from the Department of Environmental Protection. Sandy Brecker from the Department of Transportation. Mara Parker from the Office of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. And let me see if there's anyone else I've missed. Michael Bulldozer from the Office of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. I think that's all of us.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, I know we have a lot of council members that have questions. Let me begin with Councilmember Raymer.
Thank you, Council President. I appreciate your scheduling this discussion today. We've had a number of updates. I think this first one I can remember in a while before the full council. It's very appropriate. I have very mixed feelings about this. I can't really hide some of my disappointments. We are here in front of some really capable professionals with remarkable expertise who are doing everything that they've been asked to do. But my concern is they haven't been asked to do things that we really need to be doing. I can't help but feel a little bit cynical about, multi-year task forces that recommend additional community engagement processes, without a real driving focus on policy. This plan is silent on, it speaks a lot about things we don't control as much, and it's silent on some things that we really do control. One of those is smart growth. Smart growth is recognized as a key local government action on climate, and zoning around public transit, to get high density around transit is one of those policies that should be an integral part of a climate action plan. And there isn't really much here about it. Well, there isn't anything here about it. And I think that somewhat reflects, or it fully reflects, the county executive's own policies. He voted against the Bethesda master plan, which is like the most smart growth in all of Montgomery County. And I think it reflects maybe some of the biases of some of the folks who were involved in the task force process. And I feel like this is supposed to lead our community to understand and make the tough decisions that we need to make to confront the climate crisis. That was what we want. That's what we wanted. That's what we need. And, you know, it's hard to do that while being silent on smart growth. And it's hard to do that while being, I think, silent on local clean energy generation. You know, President Biden just said that if we're going to slow down the climate crisis, we have to generate about half of all electricity from solar. And, you know, that's going to require some major change, half of all electricity from solar. You know, but the great thing is this county could do that. We could plan out what our role of that is. And we know actually how many thousands of acres, it's not that many, you know, Montgomery County needs to have in solar production in order to support the renewable portfolio standards at the state to get a 50% clean grid or 100% clean grid. And we could say we're gonna ensure that we get delivery of, you know, 2,000, 4,000, 10,000 acres of solar, so that the state and the county can fulfill its clean energy goals and then achieve all these other things. But you know, when you look at the where the emissions reductions come from, you know, in the climate action plan, they come from almost entirely, you know, from substituting coal and gas for solar and wind. And yet I think we're pretty silent here on how to actually bring that to bear. You know, community choice clean energy is a great idea. It assumes that there's solar being made. And if solar isn't being made, then, you know, it doesn't work. And I think that's like a key, you know, education job that we have, is helping our community see that we've got to get focused on producing solar at, you know, at scale. We need it on top of all the buildings and all the parking lots. We need it on the ground. You know, it's got to be built at scale on the ground. There's really no way that we're going to be able to meet these kind of goals without having large solar fields, you know, kind of wherever you look, you know, on top of buildings or on the ground. And I wish the plan, you know, would highlight that need. But you know, it doesn't. So we're about to take up the building energy performance standards. You know, related to that, it's a good piece of legislation. It's going to take years and years before it actually really has an effect because of the life cycle of buildings and, you know, the reasonable pathway that you'll put in place for compliance. So that's going to take years for those buildings to improve their efficiency. But as Director Ortiz said, even an efficient building is going to be burning dirty fuel because they'll be tapping into the grid for the fuel that they use. And so, you know, whether it's the transportation sector, the building sector, or the power generation sector, it's really all about switching from coal and gas to solar and wind. You know, and I think this plan kind of brings that into relief. Well, it doesn't bring it into relief enough, actually. But if you read between the lines, you know, you can kind of see it there. So I guess, you know, question is, do you have a component of the plan that you want to focus on helping lead the county to embrace smart growth policies, you know, to support transit-oriented development, you know, maybe to support zoning changes to allow like duplexes and triplexes, you know, in existing residential neighborhoods? Like, is there a piece of what you want to do that takes on some of the more difficult issues that our community is struggling to understand and you know, would help with all that community engagement that you have planned?
Thank you for your comments. What I would say is that the climate action plan certainly does not shy away from difficult issues and difficult decisions. There's plenty of them in its pages that we must tackle as we move forward. The climate action plan was developed around the same time that the Thrive Montgomery 2050 update to the county's general master plan was being drafted and is, you know, close to completion. And so we recognize that there is this, you know, sister companion effort going on that focuses squarely on land use and zoning and planning for our county's future. And so we wanted to be complementary of those efforts, but we did not want to replicate or duplicate those efforts in our plan. So at various points within the Climate Action Plan, we recognize the importance of appropriate land use planning and the nexus between land use planning and the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. But the nitty-gritty in terms of housing policy and land use changes are a focus of the Thrive Montgomery 2050 plan, not the Climate Action Plan.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, Ms. Hochberg, does that mean you support the Thrive 2050 plan as an important effort to mitigate our carbon?
So I came here to speak about the Climate Action Plan. I'm not the expert on Thrive Montgomery 2050. I think that Thrive Montgomery 2050 is certainly important as it relates to compact development for public transportation. You know, in order for public transportation to work, you need to have denser land uses. I think that there is an important concern about denser land uses, which relates to increasing impervious surfaces, which increases flooding issues across properties. As climate change is impacting Montgomery County, we're increasingly seeing lot-to-lot drainage issues impacting neighbors. And so I think that that is an issue that must be considered as well in this conversation.
Well, okay, county executive has been undermining and thwarting Thrive 2050 at every turn. He's deploying his staff to go to the neighborhoods and rile up opposition. And the whole purpose of Thrive is to help the county embrace the future and put environmental resilience and sustainability at the center of our planning goals. So, you know, forgive me if I am often cynical with the county executive's environmental policy agenda. When we get specific proposals at the council, I'm game to take them up and move them through. And I want to thank Director Ortiz for his reminder on the Green Building Code. We got that passed out of the Fed committee yesterday, and we'll get it done in time so that you can have that in your arsenal. It's an important one. We'll grapple with BEPS, but I'm frankly disappointed by the number of proposals that we've received. And, I continue to be disappointed with the focus on solar. I think we need to be doing a lot more. Thank you, Mr. Council President.
Yeah, if I may add, with all due respect, the executive doesn't have a monopoly on the creation of climate policies and legislation. So, it's a joint responsibility, a joint effort. So I really welcome our, continued collaboration as we move forward with, pushing forward climate legislations and policies with all due urgency that it requires.
Sure, we appreciate that. The council, of course, has 100 staff and the executive has 14,000, but we're counting on you to carry the ball forward. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Ms. Hochberg, and thank you to Director Ortiz. I want to talk a little bit about something that you guys mentioned throughout, and it was kind of woven throughout the presentation, about our commitment to racial equity and social justice. One of the things that we've continued to have conversations about is that our communities of color are oftentimes more impacted by climate change than their white counterparts. But in looking at the presentation and hearing what you said, centering racial equity and social justice and having people access the CCE, while that's important, there are so many other strategies that are equally, if not more important. And so I'm just curious as to what else you guys are looking to do. I'm oftentimes very skeptical of folks who now continue to throw out the words racial equity and social justice without having any actual meat behind it. I'm a student of Councilwoman Navarro, who helped us with this, and very cautious when I hear people throw out the words but don't have the backing. And so talk to me a little bit more. I want to give you an opportunity because I didn't see it in the presentation about what else we're looking to do when it comes to our communities of color, which apprises the majority of this county now, and how we're going to ensure that they play a role and are aware of the effects of climate change.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. That example that you saw in the slides about the equity enhancing measure relating to community choice energy is one of the examples, but throughout the climate action plan, in the description section for each of the actions, there is just like that table that you saw for that one action. It's throughout the plan, so that making sure that as we are in the process of conceiving and implementing each of those climate actions, that we are being thoughtful about what are the ways that for that particular action we need to enhance and center racial equity and social justice. So specific care and attention has been placed in the context of whatever the action may be in the description as it relates to equity and social justice. I wanted to turn it over to my colleague Doug, who has been leading our effort to conceptualize a community justice academy concept, whereby we'll be involving members of our community, particularly focused on our vulnerable community members, in helping us to co-create these policies so that we're including their insights and their concerns as we move forward.
Thanks. We've recently contracted with Justice Alchemy, a small one-person firm with expertise in sort of the nexus between racial equity and climate change, and had just a meeting just the other week. We're gonna have one later this week, and to think through how we really shift the way we conduct our community engagement and how we share power. Really in the decision-making process, moving from, at its worst, ignoring communities to tokenism to sort of, here's what the county thinks, what do you guys think, all the way, shifting that along that spectrum to really co-creation and authentic collaboration. And so we're working with, the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice and HHS's Community Engagement Division, the Office of Community Partnerships, as well as the community at large. Jane Park at the Moore Network is part of thinking this through, and we'll begin to build that out as we go forward. It's not a tons of money, but it's a sort of a start to think through how we create some sort of structure, whether it's a Community Justice Academy or something else coming out of that process. The other thing we're doing, and I won't, unless you want to, I can go in greater detail, is we've contracted with Emerald Cities Collaborative, which is a firm based in DC, on a sustainable economic development analysis, where it's really identifying actions in the CAP with high job creation potential and career pathways for underrepresented and historically marginalized community. So that's another effort that's underway. I want to just mention that.
And I could add a couple of things. So authentic community level engagement is really critical. If we aren't hearing from real community members, real stakeholders that truly represent the diversity of the county, then we're failing. So the efforts that Doug has identified is that we want to have authentic relationships with all these underrepresented communities. I also want to talk a little bit about, this is indicated on slide 7, is the mapping that we've done of the most vulnerable areas in the county. And Councilman Rice, some months ago, I gave you a briefing on our watershed work. It ties into resilience. Where are the most vulnerable populations economically, socially, and where does that overlap with the most environmentally vulnerable areas of the county? So we've done a deep dive in the CAP on all the hazards. So heat island. So where, and Adriana mentioned it earlier, that now that we have that specific data, that information, that mapping, we can target our resources on tree planting, greenscaping, streetscaping, all that work that we do in those areas that need it. Flood prone areas. We're all familiar with the tragedy in Twin Brook at the apartments. We're doing a deep dive with our sister agencies to try to understand. It was a micro event, it was a severe event, but what do we learn? What other areas are vulnerable? We have lots of flood maps, as you know. We've worked together at COG on this stuff for a long time, and we've identified, and we can move our resources to those vulnerable areas, and our recent procurement on watershed does focus on those more vulnerable areas as well. we talked about the Green Bank. So that many of you were at the Paddington Square event, which was an early example of the Green Bank focusing on multifamily housing and providing clean energy installation on that property. And as we get into, we talked about this in our briefings, and is that we want to make sure that any changes that we have to require greater efficiency also has resources and financial support. Mr. President, I see your body language. I'm done.
We have lots of colleagues that I want to get to because this is for them. Councilman.
No. I'm not done because I just want to highlight one piece, and I appreciate this, Mr. President, but this is really important. While we're talking about these things as issues, we actually have to translate them into action. And so when we're talking about planting trees and offsets, there needs to be a policy priority that's there that targets those particular areas that we talked about. So yes, Mr. Ortiz, you're right. We talked about it. I want to see something substantive that happens. I also want to make sure that we're partnering with MCPS. And I didn't hear that as a part of the presentation, a part of the comments. And it may be things that you're doing, but it has to be instituted in policy. It has to be written down. Organizations like what my daughter was involved in Green Team, those need to be sponsored by the county and made sure that those are stood up in every single one of our high schools. There should be a Green Team at every single high school, and we should provide resources to them to educate our young people of color about the challenges that they're facing regarding the environment. So more to come there. Thank you, Mr. President. But again, there just needs to be more substance, not as much talking. All right, thanks.
Right. Agreed. Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you, and kudos to you, Mr. President, for wearing a green tie today. I'm sure that wasn't a coincidence.
I'm always on message.
That's right. So just a couple of thoughts, and I understand where all my colleagues are coming from, and especially those that have been around longer than I have and seen a plan or two in their day, and the need for implementation to go along with it. I'll just note a few things to stay on the positive side. I think that an opportunity is for us to greater emphasize the economic possibilities of having a green economy right here in our community. And I love the Green Bank. I'm a huge proponent of it. I think we can expand the Green Bank's potential in investing in startup companies that are focusing on green solutions to global challenges and seeding those companies to be able to start here in Montgomery County. Not just helping with infrastructure projects and capital projects and solar projects, but truly creating micro investments in firms that may be able to take advantage of some of the sea of vacant office space that we have right now in our community to really get that going. I think there's tremendous possibilities there and a lot of federal resources available in the way of grants that we may be able to uniquely leverage based on our location, being so close to DC, but also having 3 international airports all within a 4-mile radius of us. Well, more than 4 miles, but within a reasonable radius of us. So I think there's some real options there for us to go bigger on uplifting the economic impact if we do this and do it well. The other thought that I had in the back of my mind to piggyback off of something that Councilmember Rice just said is there is a tremendous opportunity for us to be more intentional in creating a new generation of advocates in this space. And, just this morning, we acknowledged the Latino Civic Project for its incredible work. And I feel like that model is a powerful one. And I think there's an opportunity for us to be intentional because I've been tremendously impressed over the last 3 years in office in having had the opportunity to meet with the sincere and authentic and incredible advocates that we have right here in Montgomery County who have international experience. Many of them have written books and have been published and have taught me so much about this issue over these last 3 years. And so how do we generate and harness that energy into, really unleashing this next generation of youth who have already shown us through their activism on social justice issues that they get it and they're all in. And so I think that could have long-lasting impact that will be helpful and important. And then the final thought I had for now is, this is not just one department who's going to be responsible for this. This is not just, Mrs. Hochberg, who's working on the second floor, advising all of us and serving as the liaison to the community, to the county executive. I appreciated her comments that, we all obviously need to be working collaboratively and together here, and good ideas can come from anywhere. And the ability to institute those ideas or execute those ideas obviously depends on where you sit. But there are a lot of really good ideas that we're going to be able to have to generate either through legislation or through programs. We talked about the composting program this morning, which I'm particularly excited about. So I think there's real opportunity for us to churn this into some more discernible action steps and items. And just the last thing I'll say for now is I very much agree with Doug's comments earlier about making this manageable and digestible for the community at large. The climate issue is totally overwhelming. It's literally leading to depression in people right now. Studies are showing that. And so how do we make it manageable for people and for constituents, for residents, to feel they already know they've got skin in this game, but how do we give them very clear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps that they can be part of this solution as well. And I do appreciate the administration's efforts, which I know I've heard about from people in industries that aren't typical. They're not part of the choir here, but they want to be part of the solution. So reaching out to our building associations, our chambers is going to be critical and does take time. And to do this right, it's an all hands on deck. Otherwise, we're just going to not take advantage of all the opportunities that are out there. So that was more of a commentary than specific recommendations. But those are some of the reflections I have for now. And I look forward to continuing to work with all of you in the implementation of some of these strategies and more moving forward. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back to you.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass.
If I may just briefly respond to something Councilmember Albanar stated, as well as Councilmember Rice. Totally agree on the need to engage the youth and empower our youth, our next generation of leaders, as well as MCPS. They've been a great partner in this work. They have been co-designing with students a climate youth summit that's going to be taking place next February. They're also doing a ton of work around electric vehicle procurement as well as solar in MCPS schools.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Glass.
All good stuff, thank you. And appreciate the thoughts and comments earlier about smart growth and solar, and even the conversation we had this morning about waste management, recognizing the interconnectedness of all of these. And I'm just going to drill down on one other aspect, since as Vice President Albanaz just said, there is a lot to digest, right? And so many different directions to go into. But Ms. Hochberg, in your presentation, one of the things you said about climate change is that here in the DC region, we're going to experience more extreme drought and also more extreme precipitation. And so to someone, it might seem confusing that we can have those two things, but that's what climate change is all about. It's swinging to the extremes. And here in Montgomery County, we are already experiencing a lot of that extreme precipitation with more flooding each year. And earlier this month, nearly 100 residents were displaced and a young man died as a result of that extreme rushing water that flowed through a Twinbrook apartment complex. And when we look at the water and the storm water and what to do, where all that precipitation goes, that's one of the reasons why earlier this year I had commissioned an OLO report to examine what some of the most pressing climate threats to Montgomery County are, and particularly what those threats are to our infrastructure. And in that OLO report, it says that flooding is one of the major concerns that we have to address here as a result of climate change. And it also says that before 2010, Montgomery County would typically experience 2 to 4 flooding events per year. But since 2010, that number has risen to nearly 40 flooding events per year. So what we really need to do is figure out how we deal with that stormwater and come up with a comprehensive review of those flood risks. And as the climate just continues to change and those extremes get even more extreme, I know that we have to look towards the future with regard to how to mitigate, how to reduce our carbon footprint, how to create more energy efficient buildings, how to bring our transportation network into take it off the grid and bring it into renewables. And we're doing all of those things, but we also have to figure out how to manage the infrastructure that we currently have and modernize it rather quickly. And so I'm curious, Ms. Hochberg or anybody else, and again, I appreciate this entire team for being here and working on this and dedicating yourself to this, but can you share with me how we keep one foot on the future, but another foot dealing with our current infrastructure?
Absolutely. First, I'd like to commend the OLO team for the climate resiliency report. It's an excellent report. We also reviewed it and incorporated aspects of it into the climate action plan. We recognize that there's a lot that we need to do around stormwater management and floodplain management. We have a team of department staff from across county government who are looking specifically at this issue. There's a lot of work that we need to do to get a better handle on this issue. Now, we don't have a good handle on it currently, as outlined in the OLO report as well as in the climate action plan. There's a lot of work cut out for us in this space alone in terms of vulnerability detailed assessments that we're going to need to do of critical infrastructure and locations across the county. We're going to need to take a hard look at how do we repair and enhance our culverts, our outfalls, without causing further damage down the stream. We're going to need to update our floodplain maps. There's county related floodplains, there's FEMA related floodplains. Not all of it is currently mapped. There's a lot of GIS work that's going to need to be done there. There's a lot of county climate data that currently resides within different departments in different formats. It's not all in the same place. We're going to need to consolidate it, centralize it, make the data that we have more usable, as well as collect more and better data. And as well as take a hard look at our codes, policies, and update those to reflect the fact of the matter that climate change is here, and these codes don't currently reflect that.
Thank you for that, and I also want to give a shout out to a colleague of ours in Annapolis, Delegate Sarah Love, who recently passed a bill that would require the Department of the Environment to update their regulations and their figures to accommodate the ever-increasing precipitation that is occurring. I think the state had been using flood data, rain data, that is now decades old, and it is no longer relevant because the problem has gotten so much more worse. So more to do here. I'm glad to hear that you have incorporated the very thorough and good OLO report into this climate action plan, and whether it goes back to T&E for further discussion or we take it up here, I know that more and more residents are asking me about it and what we're going to be doing, recognizing that things are just changing at a faster clip. And so we have to dedicate ourselves to this, not only for our future, those of our youth, but quite frankly, the world is changing. The world is on fire, and we have to do everything we can to preserve it. So thank you for this work and the continued conversations we're going to have. I yield back, Mr. President.
Thank you. We'll definitely be taking this up in T&E. Councilmember Novato.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to this team for all your work. I think it's so important that we are having this conversation at this moment. I wanted to expand a little bit about on this issue of merging, incorporating important component like land use, housing, transportation in the overall plan. I totally understand that Thrive 2050 is something that the council has received and the FIP committee has begun to deliberate on, and that at some point we'll have to make some decisions. But one of the criticisms that I know I hear all the time about our county, whether it's economic development strategic plans or anything that is really big in nature, is that we tend to do this, silos approach. And so I'm just curious to know, will there be an update? Will there be something that will accompany? Because to pretend that land use, transportation, housing is not directly related for us to be able to mitigate this very important issue, climate change, it doesn't make any sense to me. If we want to talk about equity, obviously issues around housing are going to be critical. Access to transit is going to be really critical. So land use decisions are front and center in a county like ours. There are many other components which you have incorporated. And by the way, kudos to so many people who have sat on the county council and that dais and have worked so hard. I can remember, Councilmember Berliner who put forth a number of bills. I can remember Councilmember Valerie Urban, who was the champion on the whole issue of food waste. This is not new. This council has a long history of doing some extraordinary work. So I'm glad we're building on that. But of course, we have to do all of the above. So I'm just curious, will there be a point in which we can look at a climate action plan that is holistic and that is comprehensive and that addresses the issue of land use, housing, transportation, so that we can incorporate the best practices and work together to realize the results that we seek? Is that going to happen, or are we just going to go ahead and just continue to work in silos?
We are all about breaking silos here. So we definitely, work across departments, across agencies. We work very closely with our colleagues in the planning department. We've committed ourselves to, working together on implementing the climate action plan and looking at those actions that, cross, our missions and boundaries of, what the respective departments work on. We intend to have the climate action plan be a living document because we know that things change over time, right? Technologies evolve, our knowledge evolves. And so the way that we intend to do that is through our annual climate work plan, which is our annual implementation plan. We intend to use that as an annual update. What has changed since last year? And perhaps there are some edits or updates, changes that are needed to the actions themselves. And so we intend to do that through that annual update process.
Okay, so land use, approaches to housing in terms of best practices, smart growth, transit, things like that, those areas will then be incorporated? Is that what I'm hearing?
So transit is already a part of the climate action plan. And that entire transportation section of the climate action plan underscores the importance of land use and of working together, with the planning department on these issues. However, housing issues and the overall vision for land use planning in the county, that is more the focus of the Thrive 2050 plan.
Correct, and I hear that. I would respectfully submit that I think it would be really important for us at some point to be able to have a comprehensive plan, and not just because Thrive 2050 is happening, it doesn't mean that we could not find a way to incorporate and have a holistic approach. So if somebody coming from another jurisdiction, or if any resident wants to take a look at what is our comprehensive, response to this crisis, they see that something as important as land use has been incorporated. So that's all I'm saying, because I don't think it's a best practice to have, to say, well, go to Thrive 50 to look at what we're doing in land use, and then separately, let's take a look at, as much as we can. I think it would be very useful for us to have a comprehensive, holistic plan that we can then measure ourselves against and see how we're doing. So I would just, submit that as a recommendation as you're doing your updates. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just jump in and piggyback on that. Councilmember Reamer at the beginning pointed out some of the key gaps that he sees in the plan, and Councilmember Navarro just brought this up again. I just want to hone in on this a bit, because I think this is the most important takeaway from this whole briefing and the intention of, and scheduling it. There are 1,000 important details that we could discuss today. There are youth and trees and stormwater and many other things. I'm very familiar, and my colleagues are too, about how we got here to fund and procure this project, this specific project. I have two mission level concerns, and I think they're shared by my colleagues. One is objectivity and the need to use data-driven analysis to find the most critical things among many important things. We need to have confidence in this plan and the roadmap forward. My colleagues will remember that the Climate Action Plan was specifically added to the budget in the first year of this term by the County Council to provide the county with a quantitative analysis of the most effective carbon reductions. We were blessed to have the hard work of hundreds of talented volunteers in the work groups that produced 800 recommendations. We don't know which of those recommendations are the most important, and I'm not sure our DEP or DOT or DGS staff know which are the most important. So the council's intent in funding this specific procurement to hire AECOM for this report, the reason we spent these taxpayer funds in the first place was to perform the technical analysis to find out where we get the greatest return on the many possible investments the county could make to reduce our carbon pollution. So for example, if we're going to spend $1 million, how much carbon reduction do we get by spending $1 million on electric buses versus $1 million on solar arrays on public property versus $1 million worth of reducing our food waste? But instead of the quantitative analysis that we were purchasing, we received this very vague guidance with recommendations in the plan that are only low, medium, and high. So to me, as the chair of the committee, everything here is too blurry. It's hard to know what's the most important. Specifically on page Roman 94 of the plan, in the first bullet, it has this strange statement that the plan itself is not an implementation plan with detailed costs and timelines. That's exactly what we asked for. An implementation plan, a roadmap with quantitative analysis. So I'm confused about where the quantitative analysis of greenhouse gas reduction amounts for each of these recommendations is. So I guess let me ask AECOM, because they're here and we asked them to be here for a reason. So Ms. Dingra, Ms. Go, can you tell us, are you still planning to deliver an implementation plan?
This is Eva Mamer. I'm the program manager. I'm going to defer that to Stan.
Hi, Ms. Mamer. Thank you.
My client here.
Thank you. Please feel free to introduce your team and jump in. We want to hear from you.
Oh, I was going to defer it back to Stan, actually, as my customer.
Oh, okay, I'm interested in, I think my colleagues are probably interested too in the instructions to receive, because that's what we thought we were,
Yeah, so if I may, Council President Hucker, when we were drafting the scope of work for this effort, we were requested to share the draft with the members of the T&E committee before it was finalized for any feedback that you may have had. So I did share the draft scope. I actually went back through my emails to just confirm that, in fact, that had happened. I sent it to the committee members and to the council central staff when it was January 10th, 2020. And I didn't receive any feedback on the draft scope of work. So we did move forward with finalizing the scope as I had shared it with the T&E committee.
That's great. And you just took out the council's intent to have any quantitative analysis, because we had a vigorous debate about this, and this is exactly the ability to make data-driven decisions was very important to the council at the time. We debated it at length. I think you've heard earlier today, that's what people feel like is missing and leaves us a little bit adrift at figuring out how to invest our taxpayers' limited resources.
So I think the plan does lay out the primary things we have to work on. It does prioritize the major things. It filtered those 890 recommendations down to 84, 86. And I think that one of the reasons we did not do a implementation plan is because the minute you publish that, it's out of date. So as Adriana mentioned earlier, we're doing an annual work plan because things don't go as you schedule them. If we put a plan out in 2021, by 2022, it's out of date. Things get delayed, and there are domino effects of that. And so rather than try to predict what's going to happen over the next 15 years, we'll do an annual work plan to update the activities that we're working on based on what happened in the previous year and the budget that we have. And if there are
Well,
specific,
I guess,
specific,
Dan, I would just suggest that I just speaking personally, and my colleagues can chime in, but I would rather have incomplete or out of date data than no data whatsoever, and just sort of opinions. And specifically on what was shared earlier, the AECOM project plan that I saw previously listed an implementation roadmap as a deliverable. It included climate modeling as well as a climate vulnerability assessment. So can you tell us where our climate modeling is and our climate vulnerability assessment?
I think that's in the plan. There's a chapter on climate vulnerability. And if there are specific quantitative things that you would like us to look at, please let us know, and we'd be happy to do that.
So you'll share all the data that went into the modeling?
I think the data is in the plan, but if there's something you think is missing, please let us know. Okay.
I'll follow up with you on that. That's fine. Can you talk about why the decision was made to, and when, and who made the decision to leave out the land use and housing components? Because obviously you've heard today that's an important part that I think people were expecting. And certainly one that the council and the county government generally has a lot of control over. Certainly lots of the drivers of climate change are regulated at the state and federal level. Land use and housing are two things that we have a lot of control over. So I think you've heard today that that's a gap that people have identified as a concern.
Well, what I would say is that when we had the technical climate work groups that were convening, those 800 plus recommendations that were developed.
Sure.
Members of those work groups included several colleagues from the planning department. And so those hundreds of recommendations that then were sifted down to the 86 include the insights that we received from our planning colleagues. So you can see those, for example, in our transportation section, which heavily relates to land use. So it's in there. It may not have the heading of a land use chapter, but transportation and land use go hand in hand.
Okay. I think I'll have more at the end. I'll follow up with you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for scheduling this, and Stockberg and Director Ortiz and Mr. Weisberger and Mr. Edwards for all that you're doing on this. I think a key to this whole thing is the education part, and others have talked about this, and it really is very necessary because people want to do the right thing, and people are trying to do the right thing in some cases, not in every case. But they don't know what to do, and I guess it's been mentioned a couple of times. It's a lot to digest. It gets confusing, and when something gets confusing, people throw their hands up and say, I don't know what to do. And I go back to the whole thing about the education is the key. When I believe Gaithersburg was the first municipality, first place in Maryland that did legislation for LEED certified buildings. And when we had developers come in, when we had people who wanted to build an office building, and I sat down with them in some cases, and they said, really, it's going to cost us so much more, and we're considering not coming here because of it, and yada yada. And I said, I understand what you're saying. Money's important. I mean, I'm not suggesting it's not, but if you look at how much you will save on energy costs, then consider it at that point. Look at it with a business plan. And, none of them, I don't know, I shouldn't say none of them, but many of them were not people who would have necessarily been climate action people. But once they realized there was $1 savings in doing this, then they were willing and in many cases were champions of doing it. So that became the education piece. And I go back to the whole idea for as an example, I've heard from people that they were very concerned about the gas-powered lawnmowers and Adriana, I believe you know of what I'm speaking, that there was some confusion as that whether or not in this plan we were going to say that you couldn't use a gas-powered lawnmower after 2025 or whatever the date was, 2035. And then it became clear that that was not in this plan, that there was discussion about it. But then part of the problem was that in the landscaping industry, that if they send out a crew to work for 8-10 hours and the electric charged equipment only lasted 4 to 6 hours, then they had a problem. So we need to make certain that the industries, and I know you're reaching out and I appreciate that, but we need to make certain that the industries are involved in this so that they can give us their best thought on how we can best work together to get to that better place. We need to make certain that in my opinion, as an example for the land use, I believe that your group should comment on the land use that we are looking at. That there should be, if we're going to talk about impervious surfaces or pervious surfaces, and you talk about pervious surfaces, somebody's got to cut that grass, so you need to talk about lawnmowers for that. But if we're going to talk about impervious surfaces, we have to figure out what it actually means to the plans that we're looking at. I mean, if we're at literally loggerheads, and we need to know it, we need to figure out what we can do and what we shouldn't do based on that. And I did want to touch on because Councilmember Reamer is talking about solar, and I don't think you were there, Hans, but at the fair this year, one of the announcements was that they have two farms that are actually doing. I don't know that they've actually signed the contract. They wouldn't say who the two farms were, but there's two farms that were actually getting ready to sign a contract to do solar on their land. And there was another person who was in agriculture. I went over and talked to and tried to figure out where the farms were, and he wouldn't tell me. But he said that he too was looking at doing solar on his property, and all of that. And of course, we went round and round on all of this. But my point on all of this is that when we can work together and calm things down, we can actually get to a better place. And that's when I, talk about, and to my last point, the Councilmember Rice was talking about the, MCPS. And I remember years ago when my children who were grown, but years ago when people started talking about recycling, because they were taught in school, in elementary school, you better not throw away a milk carton. You better put it in its right place, because that's what they were taught. That's what they knew was the right thing to do. They knew they were saving Earth. So we need to make certain that all parts of our community are involved in this so that we can have what is perhaps the most damaging part of the world, that we can help take care of our part of it. So thank you very much for all that you're doing. Oh, I did want to have one question. I apologize. On the part that talked about the business and residential, the actions to lower the usage, what kind of actions are you talking about?
Are you asking specifically about the lowering energy usage in the building sector?
Yes, I think it was your last slide or next to last slide.
Okay, so if I may turn over to Stan and Lindsay, who are our building sector experts here on the call.
So the principal things that we're looking at right now are related to building energy performance standards, BEPS. That legislation is before the council right now. And the International Green Construction Code we talked about as well before the council. We're also looking at, for future building code cycles, moving toward net zero new buildings. That is, buildings that generate as much energy as they use. And then we're also looking at the other sectors of the built environment. So single family homes, for example, how can we improve the energy performance of single family homes? There's been some action by that on the council, by the county and the council in the past related to the reporting of energy use. A number of years ago, there was a bill to try to include an energy audit at the time of sale of a single family home, for example. So those kind of things we'll be revisiting as we move to tackle that sector.
Very good. Thank you very much. I yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Very important topic. It's unfortunate that we're bouncing off the walls here, all over the place, but it's a serious, important topic. I appreciate the briefing. My sincere wish that we could move the political jerry-rigging off to the side, but it's an election year and that's going to happen. But I'm going to say every time it does that I wish it would stop happening in the way that it is. A couple of questions. You know, when I came onto the council, I think it was December of 2017, the previous council declared a climate emergency, right? And that we would have 100% reduction by 2035, right? And 80% by 2027. I think it was something, I think those were the numbers. I see you nodding, Adriana, so that's okay. So and then when I got on the council, myself and all my colleagues, we said, all right, let's put this money in here for this report. There's all these recommendations. We need to get down to the nitty gritty. And this is where I do think there's a fair point here that we need to dig into in a constructive way. What are the things that we can do collectively to get the best bang for our buck and reduce our footprint and to improve the environment and reduce our emissions, and come back to us so we can know. And I do think there was discussion about that should include not only the specific recommendations and tasks, but also the pace and scale and cost to which that we would implement those, right? And so this report does do a portion of that by boiling down 800 recommendations to 86, and then 31 of them, as I read this, are related to reducing emissions, right? Is that fair? Is that how I'm reading it? 31?
Yeah, I have 25, but in the ballpark.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm looking at the report. It says, yeah, but whatever. Some subset of them says 31 on your page. On one of the page, I think it was on the same page, it says 31 are aimed at primarily mitigating GHG emissions, 20 are aimed at reducing climate risk, and 35 are aimed at developing the organizational structure. If that's changed, no big deal. That's what the report says. It could, maybe you changed it to 25. So whatever that number is, and I'm assuming then they're ranked by low, medium, and high, and on the report, the red are the ones that would have the biggest bang for the buck. Is that correct reading of the report?
I'm not sure I don't have the report open right in front of me right now.
Well,
so
you color them red, low, medium, and high priority. What I'm saying is the ones that will give you the best reduction and improve the health of our environment the most. The way I'm reading it is that they're red and that they're the high priority. Is that?
I think we had tables in there that showed the actions that would provide the greatest greenhouse gas reductions if fully implemented, and the ones that would provide the greatest climate resiliency benefits if implemented.
Okay, and so that's the table. If you could tell where I'm looking at, for example, you take page one, I'm going to give you 132 in the report about electrification for commercial building. Let's stay in your zone, Stan. It says primary benefit, CHC mitigation is high, has little red cloud, and those are the ones that I see the Ida nodding about who did the report. Those are the ones that my understanding are the ones that give you the best return on investment. I'm just trying to clarify if I'm reading the report correctly. So we got a lot of people on the call.
Can you tell me what page you're on, Councilmember Joando? Just
132 of the report, the climate action report.
Let me go to that page. Okay. So the cloud you're seeing there, that's a red cloud because it's a building item, and the building items are all in red. And
okay, so that has nothing to do with the color. Has nothing to do with it. All right, but it says high, so the high, medium, and low. The high is the correct thing.
Right. So if you look at, let me find the chart for you. We'll go on. You can go on. I'll find the chart.
Okay, find the chart. So anyway, but that is one that has a high impact. That's one of the 31 that has a high impact. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. Yes.
Okay. So what we need is for the 31 that are high impact, we need you to take the next step and say, okay, well, what's the plan? Now we know we have BEPS before us, so that presumably will be part of the plan in that bucket. But for the rest of them, what is the measurable impact over time? What legislation policies do we need to change to get there? What's the cost and what's the benefit? That does need to be enumerated. And if it's not, we need to have further analysis so that we can get that, so that we can, in a substantive way, because right now I feel like I can't interact with it in a meaningful way other than to respond to the BEPS bill and some other things just kind of generally. So is that in here, or is that coming, or is there a timeline for that type of analysis?
So a couple of things here. When I refer you to page 99 on the report, 99 and 100, there's a table in there, a chart in there that shows the actions ranked by the GHG reductions, highest emissions reduction potential. So you'll see community choice energy is at the top of that list. And then they're ranked by the estimated emission reduction potential.
Right. And now, B1 is second, the one I just brought up, the building. Right.
Yeah. So the thing that we have to remember, though, is that the reduction potential of all these depends on how they're implemented. And they can be implemented in different ways. So BEPS is before you right now. There will be a discussion about how stringent to make the standard for that the buildings have to meet. And the stronger the more stringent the standard, the greater the energy reductions, but also the greater the cost and the greater the impact on properties, particularly multifamily properties, affordable housing. So we'll want to have that conversation. And then we're doing further research on that to understand our building stock better and to try to provide you with those kind of answers you're looking at. The other thing I want to provide an example. In Los Angeles, they have a study called the LA 100 study. And they looked at the plan to get to zero greenhouse gas emissions or to get 100% clean energy in Los Angeles. They worked with the National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado. They had 100 scientists working on this, and they did millions of computer simulations using the supercomputer at NREL. So I'm just pointing that out to say that this is a very complex exercise to try to figure out all these different pieces that go into these calculations. And so we've provided the first cut of this. As we move forward with implementing specific actions, we'll provide greater detail, greater granularity about things. And we're happy to answer any questions that you have if we can. And if we can't, we'll let you know that, why we can't answer it, and we'll explain what additional data we would need, additional expertise. But this is a complicated issue. We're trying to get to zero.
Yeah,
that's very hard.
I get it, and it's okay, and I understand that. I just think it needs to be clear how. So with BEPS, you've taken a point of view. This is where we think we should go right now, and you're still doing research. We just need to be a roadmap of what your point of view is. There's going to be no right answer. We're going to have to engage with you on all the issues that, particularly where there are policies. But we have little over 10 years to meet to the goal. So we have to have a framework to get there, and it has to be laid out, and we can debate with the colleagues and with public and all the stakeholders. And I think that you did do a great job in laying that out.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman. So I think one concept that's getting lost in this discussion that was not lost in the TNE committee, for which I'm a little bit puzzled, is the annual work plan. So there's 80 actions that's identified. As was mentioned earlier, there's hundreds of suggestions from the public. We're a pretty good sized team, but we're not a huge team. We're trying to pick a handful of things every year that make the most difference. The things that are before the council, like on page 90, 99, if you can pull it up, 99 and 100, BEPS, community choice energy, and the green building code. We're taking the things that are the most significant and we put them in front of the council. Now, it's a fair point. Is it, it's better to spend $1 million on solar panels or on electric buses? We can have those conversations, but in the meantime, we have to start in year one, taking on system level issues. Buses are great, but they don't move the needle. We're a big government, we're not that big. Solar panels are only so many we can do. But if we clean the grid, that's a system level change, and that will take some time. The building inventory, to be able to transfer that, that's a system level change that will take some time. So this is all part of our work plan. It is all consistent. And as Stan mentioned earlier, the prices change. We could come up with prices on a bus versus prices on a solar panel. in 3 years? Are those prices going to be the same? No. But this year we're picking the things that are the biggest movers, the system level changes that are going to get us there. It is completely consistent. So that's what's before the council.
Yeah.
I hope to help Mr. Jawanda.
No, I appreciate that. And my last question, so the yearly work plans will build upon it. Again, if we could have the idea of where we're going to get at the end of the 10 by 2035 and map back, it's fine if we change it. It's going to change, obviously. Just one thing, picking up on something Mr. Rice said, the building requirements, the electrification overall, obviously a big driver here, right? You point out appropriately that that's going to have some of the highest impacts on the most vulnerable communities by way of cost, and trying to deal with that. I think we also need to call out, there is some mention in here about potential subsidies or, maybe some, you kind of allude to things, but I have not seen, is there a specific proposal? I think we have to have those things hand in hand. Like, what the mitigation strategies are going to be for communities of color, for our low-income residents, if we take bold action. We all want to take bold action and reduce greenhouse emissions, but we have to have alongside that, here's exactly what we're going to do. And it seems a little light there. So I would just ask, is that coming? Are you going to work more on that? Hopefully we get some federal support, et cetera, et cetera. But can you talk about that? And that's my last question and suggestion.
Yeah, so as we start the discussion about BEPS, for example, we are doing additional research that will help us quantify both the greenhouse gas reductions and the high level, I'd say the high level costs of implementing different standards. I say high level because every building is different. And so we can't say the cost will be this for every building. It's going to vary depending on what the building systems are, the age of the building, the size of the building. There's so many factors that go into that, but we will have much better information on that. I think with regard to grants and subsidies and technical assistance, we recognize that that's a critical feature. We will try to come forward with some suggestions, but I think that's a discussion where we have to work together on that. Several council members have mentioned the limited resources, and we recognize that. So we need your help to collaboratively figure out what's the best combination of greenhouse gas reductions through a standard and support to buildings that have to meet that. And that can only be resolved through a conversation. And we'll try to bring as much data as we can, and we will work to provide additional data if there's something that you need.
I find that conversations work best, and I try to do this when I bring a potential solution to the conversation, and then we can work from there. So I think if that would be very, very helpful. I appreciate all the work that you all have done and are doing. I know this is a lot, and look forward to continuing to engage. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I think you're right, Stan, and Councilmember Jawanda. I very much agree, and I think I imagine you don't have a list now, but if you could help identify specific sources of government, of federal and state funding, and other external funding that you intend to. There's private funding out there as well that you intend to explore, and we can have a briefing at the T&E committee with DEP and DOT, DGS, and OIR to further explore the topic and then bring it back to the full council. If that is fine with you, I'd like to schedule that. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation here. I'll start with the fact that I think there's more agreement than disagreement here. I think there's a shared interest and a shared commitment in addressing the climate crisis. I believe that the council has worked collaboratively with the executive branch. I think everybody here reflects some of the talent that we have a lot of faith in to be able to help us navigate through this crisis. And I just want to express my appreciation for that. There's a lot to chew on here, right? And even 86 recommendations that have been winnowed down from hundreds more than that is a lot. Each one of these in and of itself is a massive undertaking and a substantial change, and frankly, to some significant disruption and course correction to where people are and how they've been accustomed to living. And I think all of us have to appreciate that. And I know that we're going to take the time and the care that is required, and then we're going to provide the the resources and the type of support that is necessary in order to help to move us in this direction. It's not just about asking residents to step up, it's making sure that government is providing the support and the help to allow residents to move in the direction that they, I think, increasingly want to go, where businesses increasingly want to go, where the marketplace wants to go. The problem that we have is that the market can't move fast enough. Residents can't move fast enough on their own, and that's why we need government to do it. I don't think it's as controversial as sometimes we make it, if it's done in a collaborative way and if it's done in a way that brings people into the conversation. I think we've proven that in certain ways that we've gone about different aspects of this. I think we continue to prove that as we move forward. Just building on a couple things that people have said here, I think one of the repeated themes that you're hearing is that the plan, which brings up a lot of really important ideas and best practices from around the world, around the country, opportunities for us to really tackle the climate crisis, it does feel a little bit more like a menu than a manual in terms of how we move forward, when we're moving forward, what the process is going to be in order to move forward, what we and residents can expect as we move forward. And that's what I think the next step is. The first step has been, okay, we have all of these ideas in one place of things that we're considering doing that would help us meet this ambitious goal. And now we need a manual to decide when we're going to do each of these aspects, how we're going to do each of these aspects, who's going to be involved, how we're going to involve them in a meaningful way to make that happen. I'll be honest, I think that's the harder work that is ahead of us in figuring out how we're going to implement this. And so I think what you're hearing from a lot of us, and I share in the comments that so many of my colleagues have made, is how do we transition this menu of options and ideas into a manual of what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, who's going to be involved in it, to actually move this forward, to turn the rhetoric of climate into results that actually bring down greenhouse gas emissions and actually allow us to tackle this existential crisis. So I look forward to working with you all on that. I know there's a commitment to work on that. This can get challenging at times. We can get siloed at times. I hope that we can break through some of those issues. Related to that, though, I'm just a little confused because at one point I have heard a reflection that this is a big list. We're going to tackle the list through the work plans. Can only take on a few things at a time. We're going to try to get the biggest bang for our buck and go after the biggest change that we can, the biggest impact that we can. But at the same time, there's an indication in both the presentation today and in the climate action plan that 75 out of the 86 actions are going to be undertaken in FY22. So I'm just confused by that. I'm hoping you could clarify that, because I am not aware of the way in which 75 of the 86 recommendations would be undertaken in FY22, which is almost a third of the way completed. So if you could share with me how those two things intersect, that it would be helpful.
Sure. So when we were developing the work plan, we met one-on-one with the various departments and agencies throughout the county who are responsible for implementing, climate solutions, and had a conversation about, okay, here's the climate action plan. These are the actions that you are the lead for. What do you have the resources and staff capacity to start working on this year? And that's how we got to 75. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to be done with 75 actions by the end of this year. Many of them are some initial steps, are going to be multi-year efforts. And our work plan outlines exactly, for those 75 actions, exactly what we're doing, proposing to do this year. We intend to issue quarterly updates so that, we can keep ourselves accountable and transparent about how we're doing, where are we, making good progress on, where we're falling short. And so at the conclusion of the first quarter of this fiscal year, which is coming up at the end of this month, I'll be reaching out to all the departments and getting updates, and we'll be posting that on our climate website.
Go ahead, Sam.
Just to say an example of that, Councilmember Friesen, is community choice energy. We have started on that process, but by law, we cannot launch an aggregation program until 2024. So that program is going to take a long time to develop by the way the law sets it up. We're working through the Public Service Commission right now on regulations, but we've certainly started on that.
Appreciate that. So a couple things. One is my personal preference would be, rather than making a little bit of progress on virtually everything, that we completely do, several things. So I think figuring out the right balance, of that, to make sure that we're actually moving the ball forward and not just working on things, but we're actually getting things done. So I just would be helpful to think through and make sure that we're, prioritizing, because it's hard to juxtapose on the one hand saying we can't possibly do all this at once, and then saying, well, we're trying to start everything and doing the best that we can. Those two things don't seem to add up to me completely, but I recognize the fact that many of these initiatives are multi-year efforts, and we can't wait to start them when we want to complete them, or else we'll never get them done either. Similarly to that, it would be helpful if each of the recommendations we had, as part of your updates, your quarterly updates, some type of progress report on each and every one of them. This is what's happening on this. This is where it is. This is the point at which it would come to the council. This is the point at which we would be going to the next step of this. This is the realistic timeline. Community choice energy is a good example. That not until 2024 will you be able to do that. And so you can plan out, each step of the process in order to get there in an appropriate way. Not everything has a specific, timeline like that. And so it'd be helpful for each of these just to have that in front of us, and then to be able to look at it almost like a dashboard of each of the recommendations of, what the intention is of the county executive. I think that would be really helpful. And then with that, the work plan would then reflect back to that and say, okay, here's what the work plan looks like. And each of us, when we look to review the work plan, we could reference back to the climate action plan and see, are we on schedule? Are we not on schedule? Are we ahead of schedule? And work to accelerate it. So I just think that the data-driven, realistic, focused approach, would be really helpful. And I think kind of transitioning this, draft plan into the action that we're going to be seeing in the timeline that we should expect would be really helpful. I'll just close. I did just want to give voice to the comments made earlier about the tie into housing and land use and transportation. I do think that you're hearing from several of us that it's disheartening and frustrating that, we're hearing from the county executive that he has concerns with Thrive and has, really made efforts to challenge many of the recommendations in Thrive, which are an approach to address some of these issues. And then here we're hearing that Thrive is the answer to the land use portion that some people have criticized has been notably left out of the process. It does feel a bit disingenuous. So I'm not trying to be overly critical here. It's nobody on this call's fault, but that is the frustration that you're hearing. I will, add my own voice to that. I share some of that frustration, and I think we do have to resolve that issue. And we can't be serious at the local level of taking on climate unless we're talking about the way people live, where they live, how they get to where they're going. That means land use. That means the way in which people use transportation, which involves where they work, where they live, and where they do the things that they do on a daily basis. And so it would really be helpful to resolve that issue, and whether it is coming up with an alternative plan, not just what we're against when it comes to land use, but actually what we're for and how it tackles climate, or a little bit more constructive feedback on Thrive, if we're going to use that as the fallback for the land use portion of our climate action plan, something that it's actually a little bit more genuinely constructive for how we address our climate goals through land use and create the type of livable, walkable communities that we talk about in transit-oriented communities that we need in order to do all of the things that you have addressed here today with all of these other aspects. So I will leave it at that. I appreciate everybody's time. I know that a lot of work has gone into this plan, and I look forward to continuing to work together with you in order to address this crisis that we can't solve all of it here at the local level, but it can't be solved unless we take our responsibility for what we need to do at the local level. And there's no place that it should start, more so than Montgomery County.
Absolutely. Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. I'll just try to maybe close this out. I don't know, but thank you again. I just want to join my colleagues in expressing confidence in this team. I think we have some of the most capable professionals here that any local government has assembled, and put to any task, you can accomplish it. And the work you're taking on with BEPS, for example, is an enormously complex policy, involving hundreds of, or thousands of buildings and so forth. So it's our arguments are more above that level, at the policy level, and we're grateful for your work. It was the original intent of the funding for the climate action plan that we would be able to know how to invest $1 million or $2 million or $5 million most effectively to reduce our climate emissions, our climate killing emissions, as Council President Hucker also spoke to. And, we crafted that appropriation with the input of the Sierra Club for that reason, just to kind of know what to get behind and what to push forward. And I think it would still be helpful to get some guidance from the executive branch about things at that level, because, we have faced difficult challenges here. 2 years ago in the budget, we added electric buses, but then we had to pull that money back to save bus routes. There are choices that we have to make. And I think it would be useful to better know those trade-offs and help the community see that. We'd like the executive to support Thrive, given the articulation that it's an important piece. I think Councilmember Friedson said it well. It would be nice if the executive was supporting Thrive and not sending other deputies out to make it more difficult, to adopt. The news on solar is not good. Property owners are finding that the restrictions are unworkable. But I really believe that if we would commit ourselves to local energy generation and really develop a plan to meet our share of the state's solar goal, we could do that. And at the end of the day, this is supposed to be the county's climate action plan. I think partly that's why we're speaking up so much, because this is supposed to be the county's plan, and so it's supposed to be something that reasonably reflects the different points of view. There's a lot of commonality here about some of these issues we're talking about housing and transportation and other things like that. So, I think it's a work in progress to make it truly the county's action plan. But thanks for what you're doing, and we'll keep plugging away at it. And if there's another big initiative you can send us, we would very much like to entertain that as well. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other comments? Okay, if not, Ms. Hochberg and Mr. Levchenko and Ms. Hochberg's whole team, Mr. Ortiz, thank you so much for everything you're doing. We are stuck we don't have enough time for important hearings like this, but we're really counting on you to come through and get this plan across the finish line. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. We look forward to continued partnership with you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, colleagues. Can we quickly revisit the consent calendar to allow all of our colleagues to vote? Can I get a motion in favor of the consent calendar?
Move.
Mr. Katz moves. Mr. Rice seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Great. That is everybody. Okay, thanks. Now, we can move on to legislative session day 24. We have expedited bill 2821, technical corrections for final consideration. Is Ms. Wellens with us?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you, council members. I'm having some connectivity problems, so I'm just going to leave the video off. Before you is expedited bill 2821. This is a technical corrections bill, and essentially what it does is goes through various sections of the code and corrects typographical or other technical errors without changing any of the substance of the code. So it's a housekeeping measure, which, you know, as the council members are familiar with, the council does a technical corrections bill once every few years, just because, you know, despite all of our best efforts and, you know, the high professionalism of our staff, you know, some typos sneak through. So this simply corrects those, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
I have a few questions about page 12. Just kidding. Okay, is there a motion to move the expedited bill?
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Friedson seconds. All kinds of people move that. All those in Madam Clerk,
you have to pick one though.
Oh, yes, Councilmember Reamer moves. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Duwando?
Yes.
Mr. Duwando votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Katz votes yes. Mr. Albernos?
Yes.
Mr. Albernos votes yes. And Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes.
Okay, that expedited bill passes. Thank you. Now I would love to have a motion to move to a closed session. We have a proposed closed session to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article 3305B7 and to consult with staff consultants or other individuals about pending or potential litigation pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article 3305B8. The topic is proposed settlement agreement of a grievance filed by a group of employees. Is there a motion?
So move.
Councilmember Katz moves. Council Vice President Alberno seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
That is unanimous. Thank you. We'll see you in closed session. Thank you, everyone.
To aid you in your daily commute,